while we wait to get started, just some fine print. I'm going to focus mainly on things that are available today, but we're a publicly traded company, so if I reference some roadmap, I just ask you make buying decisions based on what's currently available. But let's get into it. So today we're looking at the challenges that we have about using customer data in external-facing challenges and still maintaining governance and security and privacy controls. One of the things I do when I'm speaking with customers is I see that AI experiences are used a lot on internal channels. So they're used for things like summarization, they're used for things like writing drafts, they're used when you have these kind of human-in-the-loop experiences. But people are reluctant in using them for external experiences. They're worried that they can't establish controls that are required. They also worry about these two big themes. So one, accuracy. We can't afford to give the wrong answer, so we want a human-in-the-loop. Number two, trust. We're worried about leaking data about our customers in all of those external channels. So those are kind of the two big things that we're going to touch on today. How do you run human and agentic channels in a way that you have personalization and trust taken care of? The reason we think this is so important is because we think that most of the value you're going to get out of AI is actually on your customer-facing channels. So sales, commerce, service, and marketing account for more than 50% of the value that we expect to see out of Gen AI. So we think it's a must if you want to unlock the value out of those technologies. There's also a high degree of commonality here, right? I can build a repeatable workflow, I can build a unified view of the customer, and I can build an agent once and deploy to multiple channels. So that's why the returns are so good on these channels. However, customers are pretty damn demanding. In the past, what we saw is when people were doing these Gen AI projects, what they were focused on is just these kind of conversational interfaces. How do I have agents that are interacting with my customers on chat? But in practice, your customers expect inbound and outbound channels. They expect personalization across the entire set of interactions. So I'm going to be using AI for conversational interfaces. I'm going to be using agents to drive personalized content into every touch point. I'm going to enable self-service as well as enabling proactive outreach so that I'm using signals that I receive about the customer to constantly contact them about relevant offers. So we think omnichannel is really important. We think you need to have a unified view of the customer that you can use across inbound and outbound channels. And we think you need governance and controls that you can use to establish those controls across agentic and human touchpoints. And we think that the same framework that you build to make this possible today should also be able to adapt as we move to the kind of these new agentic sales models. So we can see these new frameworks like AP2, which enable agents to buy and sell services directly to each other. We can see that a lot of our customers are already thinking about what does it mean when I move from B to C to B to A to C? What does it mean when I move from B to B to B to A to B? How does my platform evolve, and how do I make sure that my channels are able to soak that up? So we think what we're talking about here really is our approach to making all of this happen. The way that we've approached this problem is what we've said is, look, inside Salesforce, we already have all of these customer channels that we're managing. We're managing channels for sales and service and marketing and commerce. We have industry cloud solutions. We think that for the foreseeable future, we are going to have to operate in this co-tasking mode where we have people and agents working together across all of those customer-facing channels. So we've created an agentic layer that runs over the top of that enables you to run those agents as digital labor and monitor them alongside your people so you can see how your people are working and how the agents are working. You can hand work back and forth. So you can do co-tasking at scale. But also, Agentforce is able to leverage all of the existing customer workflow that we've deployed inside those Customer 360 apps. So we don't build from scratch. We use the existing processes and bootstrap them to also use agents. Below that is this layer that I'm going to be speaking about today, Data Cloud. This is what I'm responsible for across EMEA. This is the way that we bring together the data across all of those channels and from all of your back office channels so you have enough context for those agentic experiences to work so you can do personalization at scale. And then under the base of this is unified metadata, unified controls, so that regardless of what the channel is, you can establish a common set of frameworks. So that's our approach to solving this problem. And what I'm going to do is start off by looking at this from kind of a tech agnostic approach, which is what I've seen is a lot of customers, when they start to design for these agentic channels, they jump straight away to thinking about AGI. So they're not thinking about how do I solve for what we have today. They're thinking about this, how do I solve for completely autonomous agents? In practice, agents are co-taskers. You decide exactly what topics you want them to service. So topics are a subset of what a human would do. each topic has a scope, and agents will refuse to do work that is outside of that scope. Then each of those topics then has a narrower range of actions and a narrow amount of data that is able to retrieve in order to get that work done. And so by breaking agents down into these topics, we have a smaller set of test conditions and a smaller set of controls that we need to put in place because we have a well-defined scope. So when our customers start to deploy agents, we encourage them to actually start off by essentially writing a digital job description. So what is that digital labor going to do? How is it going to work with your people? What are the tasks that your people carry out today? You know, I'm going to take a red, amber, green approach and say, these are tasks I'm happy for agents to handle entirely independently. These are tasks I expect the agent to hand back to a human. And these are tasks that I expect the agent to do, things like summarization of all the decision points, but a human is going to actually make the final decision, the final call for that. So that is kind of the starting point. That is how we define the scope of each of these topics and what actions and data are required in order to deliver those at scale. Right, we've defined our topics. This is how agents actually work. Once you've defined topics, when a user comes in, some external customer comes in, and they ask a question, the first thing that happens is Agentforce goes through this topic classification process. So it says, I have a range of topics I've exposed on this customer-facing channels. Which of these matches the job to be done that the customer's given me? And then the first thing that Agentforce does is it reads the instructions, so the guardrails. What should you and shouldn't you do in order to carry out that topic? And then what are the actions and allowed data points that I'm able to access in that context? So again, this is all based on your need to know and your need to act. So each of the agents has that defined per topic so that it becomes it's easier to govern, it's easier to test, it's easier to make sure that we don't have agents going and acting outside of their scope of work. Now, Agentforce will go around the loop. It'll call actions and retrieve data iteratively until there's enough data, until it's carried out the task that the user's asked for. And then finally, it'll return an outcome. So in this case, in order to retrieve this data, it's had to look up the policy for the person, it's had to look through the Q&A, through the policy terms Q&A documents, it's had to look through the product recommendation actions and those models that we have already built inside the system in order to be able to carry out this piece of work and deliver a rich response to that user. So that is all that agents are. So when we're designing for agents, we're not designing for AGI, we're designing for these things which are much more deterministic, which have a much more defined scope, and which enable us to get work done fast, and then monitor those channels, look for the work that hasn't matched an agent, add additional topics, add additional topics, add additional topics. That's the way we keep on incrementally deflecting work and making agents more and more capable. Right, so that's kind of the thought process. There's one kind of final piece here, which is obviously all of these things require some sort of coordination. So I have an agentic framework, which is the declarative framework that I use to define my agents. But then I also have the way that I manage what apps they can access and how they trigger those actions, what data they can access, what is the metadata and what is the semantics, and then finally a unified metadata layer that allows me to coordinate all of those things. So this is what we think is kind of the bare minimum in order to make agents work at scale. Now what I'm going to do now is dig into the data layer and look at this topic that we call data activation. So what we think is that most organizations have all the data that they need to deliver really personalized, amazing customer experiences, but it tends to be stranded in a back-end system, or it tends to be stranded in one channel. So the job of Data Cloud is it takes the data across your front, middle, and back office applications, and it unifies them to this connected view of the customer. And it looks across all of your channels, and it finds data that matches the same customer, matches them to one master profile, and then makes it available in the flow of work. So that is a very finite thing that we're doing. We know that every agentic interaction, context matters. Every agent that you interact with, who is the customer I'm speaking to? What is the knowledge that I need? How does that map to the customer? So that's the key problem we're solving, and that's why we focused on the customer-facing experiences. Now, all of these layers up at the top there, the consumers of Data Cloud, for example, they need different services. So Agentforce needs RAG services. It needs to be able to do what's called dynamic grounding on top of all of that data. But your business apps need that data exposed in the flow of work, in the screens where all your people work. Your BI folks need a common centralized customer metrics layer so they can all have a common understanding. Your marketing folks, your ad tech folks, they need to be able to do segmentation. They need to be able to take that data and use it to build journeys across external ad tech and martech platforms. So those are the outbound activation interfaces that Data Cloud exposes, again, so that we can use that customer data in all of those customer channels. By doing this, what we actually do is we solve kind of 4 problems, really. So problem 1 is, historically, as your customers move from acquisition channels to service channels to retention channels, you typically have these silos, you ended up with disconnected customer experiences. We know that having a full life cycle view of the customer helps us to drive much better returns. That's problem 1. Problem 2 is, historically, when we've been building data products and storing them in our lakehouses, they tend to be organized around processes or products. They don't tend to be organized around the customer. So these are typically optimized for analytics. And before we can bring it into workflow over here, we need to reorganize that data around the customer. So we talk about this need to have a customer-centric data model to remaster data you already have so that you know how it connects to that customer that you're having that interaction with. And so in order to make this possible, we define this framework that we call zero copy. So we define the zero copy partner network. A few other vendors have now followed. So you've seen some of the things from ServiceNow and from SAP. Essentially what we're saying is, we believe you already have the data you require in your lakehouse. We will virtualize that, and we will map that data to a Salesforce object so that it looks like a regular Customer 360 object, so we can use it in the flow of work without having to copy the data across in advance. We'll move from this reverse ETL world to a query on demand world, so we always have access to the latest version of the data we need in order to power that customer interaction. So that's zero copy. That's front to back integration. This third thing is more, SaaS applications historically were a little bit broken. So you tended to find if you buy lots and lots of SaaS tenants, you buy a marketing tool, you buy a service tool, you buy a sales tool, you end up with strong isolation between those tenants by design, but then you need a way of unifying the data. So for our Salesforce customers, they use Data Cloud 1 to draw data together across all of their channels that we manage into one consistent view. And then finally, job number 4 is grounding personalized AI. So both structured and unstructured data, your AI agent needs a lot more context than traditional workflow. Specifically, if your person that is working in the channel, so someone in the contact center, if they need to swivel to an external system in order to answer a question, there is no way that we're going to be able to hand that work off to a virtual agent. So before we can even think about that, we need to say, what structured knowledge do you use to answer that question, account details and what have you, and what unstructured knowledge do you use to answer that question? Before I can hand that piece of work across, I need to make sure that I take care of the plumbing for both of those. So those are the 4 things that we do. Apologies, I don't have access to this video because things are going a bit off. So I'm going to jump through the video and just jump straight into kind of how this works. Data projects can go on for years and years and not deliver anything. So the customers that are being successful with Data Cloud, they start off by really starting in the channel that they want to activate the data. So they start off by understanding their customer and also the service agents, the marketers, the sales agents, the folks that actually own the relationship with the customer. What do they actually need? Specifically, they ask them to answer 4 questions. Number 1, what do you need in the flow of work that you currently have to swivel chair to an external system for? Number 2, it's not just the raw data. What do you want to predict? What behavioral insight do you need? Number 3, if you could set a watcher on all these external events, what customer workflow would you fully automate? I have data that changes here or a score that changes here. I will put a customer on this journey. And then number 4, what agents are you trying to stand up and what additional unstructured content do they need? So this is what our Customer 360 truth might look like for a typical customer. So this happens to be a banking context. When you are building that Customer 360, and like before you can apply your governance, define what you need. So break the data down into kind of these 3 buckets. So bucket 1 is the data that kind of naturally lives inside a CRM or a loyalty management system or your contact preferences systems. What are your cases? What are your opportunities? What are the contact details? What are the leads and referrals for that customer? What are the campaigns that they've interacted with? So we're going to connect to all of your CRM systems, Salesforce and third party, and unify those to that bucket 1 of profile data. Bucket 2 is back office data. So this is data that here, in this case, has been zero copied from Databricks and Snowflake, and we've unioned the data together to create this unified view of the customer across all of those back office systems. So this is what you're going to use to understand, customers' product affinity, or in this case, their financial health, or what have you. So you are using that back office data to understand more about your customer in that channel. And then finally, bucket number 3 is interaction data. In order to do things like next page personalization, in order to understand what offers might be relevant, I want to instrument more websites, I want to look at all my marketing campaigns that the customers reacted to, and I'm probably going to gather this data in real time. So we have real-time connectors into Data Cloud so that you can unify that to the profile and then use it for a next best action while the customer's in the flow of work. So once you've gathered those 3 buckets, ask your people, what behavioral insights do you want? So the behavioral insights here are propensity to purchase, or engagement scores, or likelihood to attrit, but also things like financial health indicators. Also, for example, I can pass that same data off to Gen AI and use it to generate kind of these tear sheet summaries, or I could get maybe, for example, detailed account summarization. This data is available for people in the flow of work, but it's also available for those fully autonomous agents. Because my person now has access and they don't have to swivel chair, I know that my fully autonomous agent is going to be able to use the same data to generate these rich summaries and do real work for me. So that's kind of the thought process. And I'm starting with the end, with what do I mean by Customer 360, before I get into the how does this work. So let me kind of, let me back up a little bit and look at actually how this works under the covers. Kind of really 5 steps you need to think about. So what we built inside Data Cloud, firstly, we have a big connector ecosystem. We can connect, we have more than 200 connectors to common SaaS applications, but also we have this zero copy integration framework, which enables us to take data you have already in your lakehouse and map it into our controls framework and virtualize it. That is 2-way integration. So we can take the data you already have, make it available as a table in Salesforce, but we can also take the data in Salesforce and expose it back to, for example, Databricks, so that that Databricks environment has access to the same data without having to move the data, run ETL processes in order to be able to use that. So we think that this process, where you're taking data you already have and you're mapping it into the business process, because you're using data assets you already have, it really is kind of the ultimate upgrade to your Snowflake data, your Databricks data, your BigQuery data, your AWS data. It's the way that you take those data products you already have and link them into the flow of work so that every seller, every service agent, every marketer is able to use that. But connectivity is not the thing that makes it useful. The next thing that we need to do is we need to take all of your schemas from all of your different business systems, and we need to harmonize it to our Customer 360 object model. So we have a very opinionated object model of how accounts and leads and opportunities and cases and individuals should look in order for us to use them in the flow of work. When we build industry clouds, we add additional data models, for example, for manufacturing, for financial services, so that we have all of those representations out of the box of how we expect data to look in order for us to use it in repeatable workflows. So when you download an app off of AppExchange, it'll just work without you having to do tons of integration. So that's kind of the second step. This also takes care of making sure that we've integrated the data into the applications permissions framework. So if you have access to this account, we understand how the related data flows down from that. So start off with the base data model and extend that rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper. Step 3 is matching and unification. So we have a matching engine inside Data Cloud. You can define rules for how you match and reconcile duplicate data about the same customer. So if you have different primary keys for the same customer across all your backend systems, we reconcile those to one master entity, and then we enrich that with calculated insights and predictions. We can also use predictive models you've built in your backend platform. So in SageMaker or Databricks or Google, if you have those models already in Vertex, you can import them into the system and use those for inference against this unified profile so you understand the customer better. And then finally, we apply governance. So I've created this unified profile for my customer across all of my channels. Now this is kind of really important step. Before I can expose that data to a channel, whether it's an agentic channel or a human channel, I should always be exposing the data on what they need. And internal and external channels will have a different need to know. So there's a number of ways that we break down that profile and again, apply centralized governance to all of those applications. The first way is the most restrictive. I think this is useful for a small subset of our customers. We call this data spaces. So I showed you we can do for example, we can build a unified profile. Well, sometimes I need a different unified profile for business context A, I am working with my brokers, versus business context B, I'm working directly with my consumers, versus business context C, I'm working in a marketing context. And I might have a different need to know based on each of those things. So what we can do is we can take we can have different data models and different unified profiles for each of those contexts that are all built on top of this common data layer. That is that is the first mechanism we have to subdivide. But now we also have a much more granular access management mechanism. So as data flows into Data Cloud, we're using AI to tag it and to classify those tags. And then those tags, once they've been created, we can also either use AI to define role-based access controls, or we can have human-defined role-based access controls. So if you, for example, need to mask PI or credit card data, or do row-level or column-level security, you can do all of that now in this central point. You define these attributes, and then you map them to the channel, so that anyone that comes in with Salesforce identity on that channel automatically has that masking and governance applied to that interaction. That means that an agent that operates on an external channel will have a less right to know than an agent that operates on an internal channel, and you've established centralized governance for that. Right, that's all that's required in order to get data ready for activation. Now, as I showed you, we expose this in screens, we expose it to marketers for segmentation, we expose it to our workflow engine, so you can build data-driven actions on top of that and, for example, populate webhooks and syndicate the data out. There's a number of mechanisms that enable us to expose this both to Salesforce downstream apps, but also third-party downstream apps. But the key thing is we have this one view and this one set of governance policies that follows that customer around throughout the entire life cycle across all of these different channels. I mentioned briefly that your customer also needs unstructured data. So along with what I've been speaking about here so far, which is mainly focused on structured data, we've also we have a fully end-to-end managed unstructured data pipeline that is integrated with our reasoning engine, which is what we call Atlas. So as data is flowing in, Atlas is doing things like RAG-enriched chunking and embedding, so it's improving the quality of that knowledge to make it more accessible. And then as data is flowing out, we have a retriever framework which enables us to filter knowledge chunks based on the business context, so you get access to more accurate data by, for example, filtering to a product category before I do a knowledge search. So we've thought about structured and unstructured at the same time inside the single platform. That is the data layer, but having predictable agents isn't just about kind of this one and done process where I've governed the data and I've deployed an agent and it's good forever. We've also kind of thought about how do I make it quicker to build. We've got reusable actions and tasks and reusable agent configurations. We have a batch testing center which will generate utterances and test those agents for you. And we've just launched this framework which gives us complete visibility. So what's kind of interesting is if I have a service agent, I will have a different set of metrics that matter to me compared to a sales agent, because I measure service in a kind of a different way. So we've kind of thought about this at 3 layers. So layer 1 is the business view. How does a business user understand and manage that digital labor? Layer 2 is the technical view. So how does a technologist that is configuring those agents, when they are configuring topics, how do they understand which topics are red and which ones are green? How do they make sure that if something is red, I can quickly detect what the problem is with that and go through some sort of improvement process? And all the way down, technologists need to explore this all the way down to the individual conversation, so that when they get bad results, they can explore the conversation, see exactly what knowledge was retrieved, so that they have that full auditability, so they can prove to, for example, regulators that they know exactly what their agents are doing on all of their channels. So that is kind of the second big concept, is don't just think about managing the data and deploying, also think about end-to-end lifecycle management, so you can make sure that agents continue to deliver value and that you can inspect them when things go wrong and you can continuously improve them. We've gone through this process on our agents and helped at Salesforce.com. We iteratively improved and improved and improved up to the point where we're now at 84% deflection, which for us, it definitely wasn't a one and done thing. It was something which required this process of continuous improvement, identifying what additional knowledge, additional topics are required, so that we get more and more case deflection as we go forwards. Final topic, before I wrap up. We have inside the same platform, that we are using to govern data for workflow. We also have a semantic layer that we're using to govern data so that your people can use that same connected view of the customer to ask advanced questions. So what you'll see is the way that people interact with data is they divide it up into kind of smaller semantic models, smaller subsets of the data. So Tableau Next, which runs on top of Data Cloud, allows you to build these smaller kind of knowledge sets, so smaller semantic models on top of the data. And then we also have these kind of out-of-the-box skills, which, for example, this skill here is called concierge. In the flow of work, people can now ask questions and interact with all of that knowledge that's inside Salesforce. Inside Slack, people can use the same knowledge that's inside Salesforce. They use the semantic layer to define their metrics and to group that into knowledge categories. And then they use the AI tools and assistants that run higher up in the platform to expose those to all of their agents and to consumers in every part of the business. So if you are interested in Tableau Next, we have a session that is running tomorrow. I'll put up some details of that. But before we get to that, our perspective on the market is we believe, honestly, most of our customers already have all of the data that they need to deliver these amazing customer experiences, to deliver personalization at scale. That's what gets us out of bed. We want every customer journey to be more beautiful. So what we think is, look, focus on activation. Don't focus on trying to remaster the data you already have. We tend to find that your data is in a much better quality than you expect. It's just not connected to that single view of the customer. So by solving this last mile problem, by connecting it to workflow, by making sure that you can deliver your controls for that data in the flow of work, we believe that you can activate that data at scale. So I've put up a few learning resources here. Please join us tomorrow. We'll be going through how Tableau Next works, and we'll be going from the semantic layer up, so we'll go into that in some detail. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.